All right, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Buck and I'm the Director of Pro Sports at Sparta Science. Today will be the first of a customer spotlight series where we hope to provide a platform for our customers to share the successes that they've had and give us a look into how they do it. Arizona State University is one of the most storied collegiate baseball programs in the country, touting 5 national championships and the most alumni to ever play in the MLB. ASU continues to attract some of the nation's highest caliber baseball talent. With top talent and high expectations to win, the performance team must prioritize health and availability of their roster in tandem with the physical development. In this webinar, we get to sit down with strength and conditioning coach Jason Robbins and athletic trainer Jesse Lohman to get a look into how they've created cross-departmental alignment to prioritize athlete health. So I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves, but what I'd love is just a little bit of background from you, mainly how you got in the industry, and then ultimately what led you to Tempe and joining ASU baseball. So let's go ahead and start with Jason.
Buck, thanks for having us. I started out playing football at the University of Toledo. Jesse will be quick to say that I was a kicker there, so that's usually the first thing everybody makes fun of. So after my career there, I was pretty fortunate to get a job at the University of Michigan, spent a couple years there, then moved on to Indiana University, spent 5 years there, but that's where I met the head baseball coach here, Tracy Smith. Very successful at Indiana, and he got the job out at Arizona State and asked if I wanted to come along and be baseball only, and couldn't turn on the sun. So I followed him, and I've been here for 6 years.
Awesome. Jesse, go ahead.
I've been an athletic trainer for going on 14 years now. Got my education at Sacramento State University. In that time frame, I did an internship with the San Francisco Giants in 2006. And then I was born and raised here, so I supported the Sun Devils probably since I was in diapers. So the opportunity to come here and be the athletic trainer for a program that I've supported since I was young was certainly an opportunity not to pass up. Kind of worked my way up in a little unorthodox kind of way. Started at a large high school in Scottsdale. Saw some quality baseball players out of that school, and went from there to Scottsdale Community College, where we had seen some junior college World Series experience in Oklahoma. And like I said, just right people, right time, right experience got me here. So I intend on being here for a long time going forward.
Yeah, definitely a breeding ground of talent there. There's no shortage, definitely. So, well, good to hear how you guys got to Tempe, and really, I'm fortunate to be talking with you guys today and really kind of getting to know you guys over the last few years. So I'm excited to share some light on what you guys do behind the scenes and part of why you guys have had so much success. I think to start the conversation, I think we'll start at a high level, and setting your goals as a team. It sounds obvious, but the goals of the performance team are usually driven by the head coach. And so the direction of your program and the metrics, need to follow suit. So the difference is that some head coaches just want you getting off the bus looking big. A lot of times the head coach really just wants to drive culture through the program and more of that brotherhood. And in other times they just want the best athlete to be available to play. So knowing that, what are the top priorities of the ASU baseball performance team, and how do you guys go about that?
Without a doubt, health is the most important thing. You don't come to a school like Arizona State without having some talent. So that talent needs to be out on the field to play. So even as a strength coach, I recognize that they have to stay healthy first and foremost. Second to that is culture. And the culture is in the weight room, out on the practice field, in the training room with Jesse. So we all have a hand in making sure that culture is where it needs to be. Where that fits in with me is in our style of play. Our coaches like a physical style of play. We like to hit home runs. That's what we do. So that the weight room kind of mirrors that. But first and foremost, we have to stay healthy.
I would say along those lines too, with the availability piece, a lot of times when we go to our head coach and we're discussing some things that Jason and I may want to try with the guys, a lot of it is driven by the first question we're going to get from the head coach is it going to make them better at baseball? Is it going to help us win games? And outside of that, the rest is kind of our realm to kind of go attack. And as long as that's the goal and that's the priority in mind, that's a lot of where our areas kind of work in coordination with each other to keep that particular goal in mind. The goal is to play good baseball at the end of the day, and driving that in our specific areas is where we start and finish.
Oh, definitely. It's good to hear that. And the culture being such a huge part, especially at the collegiate realm. And those guys walk in and, this place is where a lot of dudes came through. This is a place where talent comes through. They make it to the bigs. There's high expectations from the get-go. How often and how early are you meeting these guys as they walk in? And Jason, when you're taking them over to Muni and showing them, hey, this is where we're going to do it, how early does that start?
The recruiting process, every year it gets earlier and earlier. It's not uncommon to have, freshmen. We've had a couple 8th graders, but really our staff, they try to identify kids a little bit later. They don't want to miss on kids, so they bring them in a little bit later. But for me, it really starts once they step foot on campus. All the recruiting, that's up to the coaches. I don't really care until the summer before, and we try to get all our incoming recruits on campus the summer before their freshman year, just to kind of get them acclimated to school, get them acclimated to college life. And really for me, it's getting them used to the weight room and starting that culture and getting my eyes on them.
And some of that does start too in the recruiting process, where when we do get a chance to meet with these guys that our coaches are bringing into the stadium to show them around and kind of give them a glimpse of what being an ASU baseball player is. I would say we do take that opportunity. Certainly I do, to be able to sit in front of parents and the player coming in and saying, hey, this is the expectation of the training room. You are expected to put in effort, not just to play baseball, not just to be a student, not just in the weight room, but the training room has a role. And shifting that culture mindset of the training room is a bad place, stay out of it. We try to drive home, there's a priority to be had in here. And with that, that's going to give you the opportunity to play more baseball games from a health standpoint. So we do take those opportunities, but again, with what Jason said, until those athletes are on campus, I would say it's at a very certain minimal level, especially with maybe not this year, but in years past, where a lot of those high school kids that we're recruiting, a lot of them have the opportunity to take an opportunity to get drafted and move on. So kind of our mindset a little bit too is until they're in classes and in our rooms, they're not necessarily somebody that's part of what we have going on. But once they are, as soon as their footsteps on campus, we take that opportunity as quickly as we can, for sure.
Yeah, you guys get about, a small fraction of the ones who say they're going to come there. A lot of them are going in the draft, and specifically for you guys, you guys are known for drafting or putting talent in the draft, but most of them don't even get to you. So, let's get right into it, guys. So we start talking about KPIs and key performance indicators. We often talk about metrics. I think it's important to differentiate between, leading and lagging indicators when it comes to metrics. So lagging metrics are, outcome measures. And in sport, most of the time you'll know if you did a good job or not with these, at the end of the season, whether that be wins, man games lost, et cetera. A leading indicator is something that can be measured more frequently during the process and is correlated with these lagging metrics. So let's get into some of these lagging indicators that represent availability. And so, Jesse, I would love for you to kind of dig into and talk on some of the details of, what you're looking at the end of the season as far as the availability of your athletes.
I think it starts probably a lot similar with Pro Bowl, where they look at DL days accumulatively over the year for each organization, each roster. Certainly I take that approach, and that's certainly probably the leading one that our coaching staff and our program is going to be most impacted by is just how many games did these guys miss, or how many scrimmages did these guys miss in the fall due to injury. And that to me is where I start. Along those lines though, certainly surgeries, amount of MRIs that I've had to get for injuries, those things go hand in hand, and some of those kind of relate to the institution. And at the end of the day, those injuries cost money. And in Pro Bowl, it's certainly different where, a player that an organization's invested in, that's costing them money when that player is not healthy and able to play. So putting that as a priority in that we want our products on the field to be as available as possible, looking at how many DL days they have at our level, and then certainly grading that up against surgeries, time lost, season lost, and then number of MRIs that I'm sending out for that the university is going to be responsible for paying. That matters. So those are some of those lagging measurements that you're talking about in my mind.
Yeah, that's well said. Availability obviously is going to lead to more wins. Having them out there on the field, that's a big piece of it, obviously. And so we'll get more into that a little bit later. I want to touch on that, but I want to get into some of the leading metrics you guys track along the way as well. Some of these leading indicators, obviously the use of Sparta Science and some other metrics that you guys look at as well. Jason, let's go ahead and start with you. These leading indicators you're tracking throughout the season, whether that be in season or off season, that correlates with kind of these wins, losses, and injuries. Let's start with the jump scan. Let's get right into what you're looking at with the jump scan and why you're looking at it.
Yeah, so when we scan, I'm trying to put them into buckets. That's the easiest way to handle a whole roster, is kind of identify the major metrics. So we have 4 major categories that when they test, they're going to get put into. So for us, it's going to be the low explode, high explode, high drive, and low drive. From there, I'm going to change the workout that they're going to do. So based on which bucket they're in, that's going to help me identify what their main lift is going to be. So the hardest part in utilizing the Sparta is how is I going to fit it within what Arizona State does and what do I do in our culture piece. So what I did was just try to figure out, all right, what can I take from the Sparta metrics, and that's figuring out what's the best exercise to improve a trait that I'm trying to do. So once I get them in that bucket, they test. Then when I write their workout, I take that corresponding exercise. So say if a guy, he needs to work on his load, he's going to front squat and he's going to do some sort of squatting variation all 3 days. Where if I've got somebody that's going to be a low explode, he's going to do some sort of deadlift or a hinge variation on those days. So really, I'm going to take that jump scan and have it determine what I'm going to do as their main movement for their lifts.
That's really good to see that too. And when the individual is doing the jump scan, can you tell me a little bit of what you might tell them afterwards? When they're doing the scan in the season, why as a student athlete am I doing this, and how is it going to impact what I'm doing? Can you tell me a little bit about what you might tell them?
Yeah, it's like everything. You have to educate the kids on why they're doing what they're doing. All kids are competitive. So they're doing a jump and they want to get high numbers, but they don't know what it means. So really, the first thing is trying to get them to understand that it has nothing to do with performance. Kids nowadays associate with some sort of a test or assessment with performance. And I tell kids it has absolutely nothing to do with that. This is keeping you healthy. So how I can manipulate the exercises to work on the different variables all feeds into keeping you healthy. The performance aspect will come. That's from the weight room. That's from your skill development side of things. But I'm really just trying to educate the kids on why we're doing the scan, and then what it means to them. Because even though in our world we understand what all these metrics are, the kids don't. So I try to simplify it for them. Some kids don't care, don't want to know. They just say, what does this mean? Okay, I got to do this exercise. Okay. And I'm fine with that. I still try to educate them a little bit more, because when you understand it, you buy in a little bit better. Some people want to know absolutely everything, and I'll even bring them up in my office and sit down and show them graphs and charts and really get them to understand it. But really just trying to get them to understand what the variables mean to them. And they compete with the overall number. So that's the biggest drive, and the intent to get them to jump to give the most accurate assessment is they are competitive and they want to beat each other, which is fantastic. But just getting them to understand that when they jump and they have a certain variable, it's going to put them to certain exercises, and then that's going to help keep them healthy.
Right. No, that's well said. The education piece is so huge, and oftentimes it's skipped over completely. And the athlete can easily feel like a lab rat, and they don't know what's happening with that information. I think being able to educate them there and tell them the kind of the why behind it is definitely going to improve the relationship, behind everything you do. So thanks for that, Jason. So Jesse, I know that you guys do a range of motion assessment as well. Can you dig into that a little bit for us as well?
Yeah. So kind of in tandem with, we do the balance scans on the Sparta platform, but the range of motion assessment I target hip, shoulder, thoracic spine, ankle, and kind of get all those range of motion measurements, put them in a spreadsheet, and then identify deficits off that based upon what I would consider more of a baseball norm. I think it's unfair to assume that athletes of any sport are the same as the average Joe walking down the sidewalk. So understanding that there's certain adaptations in a shoulder or a hip or in a T-spine that may be more or less range of motion than the average person. And so coming up with what is specific to our sport that I need to identify that could be a deficit that either sets them back from performance, but first and foremost, and obviously just sets them back from a physical health standpoint. So that's kind of the goal with the range of motion assessment. And we put a lot of emphasis too, and especially coming from the hips, I think just identifying where those deficits are in that hip complex is kind of the foundation, even more so than maybe the shoulder is to me. So we kind of start there and then kind of branch out to the rest of the body in the range of motion assessment.
No, I love that you referred to normative data, versus, some of the people that are walking on the street, because I think a lot of times, it's not talked about enough that the skill that they're doing is going to dictate, how they function and how these joints are. And so when you're looking at these ranges of motion, I think sometimes you're going to see certain things in a specific skill set, such as a pitcher, i.e. throwing shoulder, landing leg, these differences aren't going to be what other positions are or your average Joes are. They might be different. So I think it's good to know these norms and where they might compare to their specific, population. So you mentioned the range of motion and you mentioned the balance and plank. And Jesse, as the athletic trainer, I know that you operate the balance and the plank assessments as part of your duties and kind of what you look at. So go a little bit into the balance and the plank and what you're seeing side by side with that range of motion.
I think looking at that, it's become a tool just to kind of show our guys what body control is. I mean, to me, you put it prospectively with the guy that was just drafted first overall this year, and you watch him swing a bat. Spencer Torkelson was firmly planted in the ground, was often on balance, and had a lot of success based upon that. And you look at some of our younger guys in comparison, good players, but maybe they're a little bit more out of control with what they're doing with their body and not understanding how their body moves, how to balance their body, how to have that proprioceptive sort of component that allows them to optimize their own individual performance. So looking at the balance scan, I do both. I do the lower and the upper extremity. It kind of just shows me how well those athletes can move. And some of them look at me kind of cross-eyed, like, this is going to tell me that I'm going to be a better baseball player if I can improve this, or why am I doing this? I got to stand here for 20 seconds, 3 times with my eyes closed. Come on. And when I put it into a baseball context, 1, that's where they understand it more. And 2, that's where I start to see the crossover. And we have seen some correlations with guys that are terrible in some of their balance and some of their injury rates. So as long as I keep seeing those correlations, I'm certainly going to keep doing it and using it. And then I program along with the, stepping back a little too, with the range of motion assessment and the balance scans, that's coupled with a prescriptive corrective exercise program. So kind of like Jason said, he puts his people based upon their scans in a bucket. I've got 6 deficit buckets that guys can test into and certainly test out of once they correct it. So that's kind of how we attack it. I tell recruits, I tell our guys, my philosophy is to throw a blanket over our whole clubhouse of players and say, if we do all these stretches and all these exercises and we all do them the exact same manner, you're all going to improve. I don't think that's fair. Every body is different. And so attacking each individual physically is kind of the goal of our whole system. And certainly, obviously, Sparta's platform is the same thing. It's you're finding the individual characteristics and trying to program based upon that.
And they also work in conjunction with each other. I mean, Jesse puts these guys in certain corrective exercises, and I can also use that data and let them know, hey, if you make the improvements on these deficits here, that's going to influence your Sparta scan, and it's going to maybe alter what we're getting out of there. Nobody likes to be in a low drive group, which is all the single unilateral work. Any athlete, anybody will tell you doing single leg work is more difficult than doing, bilateral work. So none of them want to do it. So we can use that and say, hey, work on doing these certain corrective exercises, and that can also influence your jump scan that will take you out of the category to do a reverse lunge and let you squat, which is what you want to do in the first place. So really, we kind of use them and they go hand in hand with each other.
No, that's good detail. And Jesse, I love your conversations with the guys. Is this going to help me hit bombs, man? Like, what is this about? Like, love that conversation. And then it gets to an educational standpoint. And, you know, I think too, especially in baseball, it can be monotonous. There's a lot of a grind, you know, and especially in the heat you guys are dealing with and everything like that. Being able to understand as an athlete when an improvement has been made, when you've been working on a specific quality, and celebrating that small victory is huge. You're not just going to keep doing the same thing, because that's not how physiology works. You need to adapt. We need to provide a different stimulus to keep progressing the individual. And I know you guys have done a good job of that. And Jesse, when we talk a lot, you tell me a lot, testing is training. Training is testing. You know, we don't want to have these specific testing days, and we want to do something that's practical so we can get some data, but we also want to coach. I mean, that's why we're here. We want our hands on the athletes. You talk about maybe how much you assess, and then does it free you up to be more of a coach, and how much do your eyes tell you, yes, there's data that we can look at, but a lot of times I gotta focus on what I'm seeing and try and improve it from there. Can you talk about that in the gym?
I think as a clinician, I think, especially in a world where analytics has become so abundant, especially in our sport, right? I mean, we have so much data points from the performance side, you know, spin rates and velocities and bat speed and exit velo and et cetera and so forth. Jason, I say all the time, probably our finest tool, and it should be, trying to set the bar high for ourselves, is our eyes. You know, the numbers that we come up with in a range of motion setting or Sparta scan setting, that should be in conjunction with what our eyes should be already telling us about how somebody moves. And I know Jason said just in the weight room, he's like, I'm watching this guy do a squat, or I'm watching this guy do this movement. I know he's going to be in this grouping. And sure enough, the Sparta ends up just confirming that and helping us program. Same thing with range of motion. Wow, that guy doesn't, he rotates a lot through his lumbar. Why is it? I bet his hips are pretty tight. Let me look at his range of motion in his hips and some of his hip rotation. And typically it's just confirming what my eyes are already telling me. So to that point, yeah, our eyes are our best tool, and it should start there. And Jason and I often will we sit next to each other for 56 plus games a year. And a lot of times we're sitting there kind of, you know, certainly trying to enjoy the baseball that's at this program, but we do kind of, I guess, get a little geeked out sometimes to sit there and chat about what we're seeing about how guys move and how guys run, how guys swing, how guys throw. And you start putting that picture together, and it's almost like creating a painting of biomechanics, if you will, of each individual's body and how they're producing their athleticism on the field. So, and that's where you put the numbers together, and you put the picture together, and you put the subjective eye together, and you put what you're seeing in the weight room. And when you put all that together, you can certainly start to identify where those risks are, where they're weak in performance, where we can improve all of that. So I guess to that point, that's kind of how my brain works when I'm using the different stuff that we have in the training room and in the weight room, and Jason and I bouncing our heads off each other. And certainly going back, I think it's very worth noting that the professional marriage between Jason and I and how we work together in our individual departments is key to what we've accomplished so far from an injury rate and a performance rate. That marriage has to be there, if you will. And it's been incredibly successful, and I think every year we find a way to make it stronger.
Absolutely. And Bud, going back to, you know, from the weight room perspective with testing, you know, I make no bones about it. I hate testing. Just because for me, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, because you get very, very valuable data from it. But baseball is a very unique sport where they're in season, you know, the majority of the year. So my time that I get to devote to just lifting is getting smaller and smaller by the year, with more and more NCAA regulations that get put in place, having kids have more day off. My main off season when they're not playing baseball is 3 weeks. And that's the only time I have them, they're not playing baseball. So I don't want to give up absolute days to focus on testing. So for me, you know, I always tell people we have 3 layers of testing. We have Sparta, which is going to give you your force profile. We have a range of motion assessment, and then my eyes, and which Jesse alluded to. And so, you know, Sparta, I'm testing anywhere from the off season once every 4 weeks, in season once every 2 weeks. range of motion, we're testing 3 to 4 times a year. So we're not spending a large time doing tests, because really I'm testing them every single day. There's not a day in the weight room, on the field, that I'm not watching guys move and making mental notes and kind of taking all the layers of data and putting them together to make sure our training program fits the individual, because that's what it's about. You know, I don't need a test to make sure my kids are bought into the weight room because, oh, I went up and squat 10 pounds. You know, that's not what we use to get our buy-in. We've got a bar set way higher than needing to have a test to get our guys to buy in. So I don't like spending a lot of time doing tests. I like our multi-layered approach. Give us all the data we need to make sure we get an individual program for a player to make sure they play the best baseball they can.
Well, I'm going to keep pushing on that then a little bit. So you talk about individualizing your programming, right? Not everyone's the same. And I know, you know, coming from the baseball world, it is oftentimes when you have a lot of people to program for, it's very easy to, okay, position players are going to get this workout, pitchers are going to get this workout, right? But when we're assessing, and especially what you guys are seeing, they don't necessarily fall into that category. You know, athlete or pitchers are athletes. Sometimes they're better athletes than some of your position players. You know, you probably got a few listening that are upset I said that. That's okay. But anyways, I want you to get into this, right? So how do you individualize a program, and give me some examples maybe of how each guy is different, and so how you need to specifically program for them?
So really, pitchers are athletes, but there are sometimes they're going to be doing some things differently. For whatever reason, it's usually upper body. I'm going to do things a little bit different, but, you know, to kind of pull back a little bit, you know, when we have those 4 buckets that are put into, I don't care if you're a pitcher or a position player, you get put into that bucket. So I've got 4 lifts going on at the same time with their main movement. Then when they go to the upper body, that's when I'm going to go a little bit more pitcher or position. And it's really because pitchers, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the backside. So they're going to have a higher volume of their pulls to a push. But in terms of absolute exercises, they do the same exercises. They're athletes. And I think sometimes you get stuck in silos and, you know, oh, I'm a pitcher, I can't do this because, you know, I throw a lot. Well, you know what? So does a catcher. So does a shortstop. Everybody throws a lot. So really the breaking down of the buckets kind of give me what are my main exercises going to be. And then from there, I'm going to treat you like an athlete. So it sounds crazier than it is, but I usually have 8 different workouts going on at the same time because there's 4 pitchers doing a lower body, 4 position players, and then the corresponding upper body. But when it really comes down to it, if I've got a low explode guy, he's doing the main low explode exercise while somebody else might be doing a front squat. So I got somebody doing a front squat, somebody's doing a deadlift. Their second exercise might be the same. It might be an RDL. Depending on the day, it might be different. Then when they move to the upper body, that's when it might be pitcher or position. But I might have 2 position guys, one's deadlifting and one is squatting. When they get to the upper body, they're paired and they're doing the same exact exercise. So that was important for me when trying to figure out how I wanted to implement Sparta, was because a huge part of the weight room is our culture, and culture is training together, being very team oriented, wearing the same thing, coaching each other up. So I was really hesitant in trying to figure out how I can get this individualized data, which is extremely important for these kids. We need to treat them as individuals, but at the same time, we are a team, and the culture is a big part of our success. So how do I marry those two? And it took a little bit of playing, but once I figured out the room and the flow, you know, nobody really knows. The guys look at their card and they say, all right, I got a front squat. And then they just go straight through, and I partner up with somebody that's kind of the same workout. So it flows that way.
No, I love the detail there. That's really good. Now I'm going to backtrack a second. You guys mentioned always looking at things with your eyes, right? Your eyes tell you a lot. But in cases where you guys have some of these athletes coming into Tempe that are freak athletes, you guys get some of the best of the best. And those guys, from what we know, are master compensators. They get away with a lot because they are so skilled. So sometimes what you see with your eyes and what you see in the data might be slightly different because they're so skilled, and sometimes they get around things so easily. So that's one piece of looking at this data frequently. You can say, hey, maybe we didn't see that, and that's something that we should look into and maybe program for it or take into consideration. So that's really good at, talking on those points there. I did want to scoot forward a little bit here and really talk about, I want to get more into the weeds of what you guys do, okay? So when guys come into Tempe, when they first arrive, how do you use Sparta with them? And I'll let either you start here, but what's the first thing you do? Get this assessment obviously on them, but what are the steps you take if a new guy comes in as a freshman?
Jess, do you want to handle the medical side, and then I'll.
Okay. Well, outside of the physical, so in a normal year, we would have guys showing up about the end of June, the incoming freshman class, and any returners that are still around that live here in the Valley or want to stay here in the Valley while getting ready for classes to start in August. Again, we'll work out with Jason. Outside of the physical, and Jason's probably going to kind of regurgitate this a little bit, but I think we actually give them some time to kind of get their feet wet and what the processes are. I don't do my range of motion assessments until they've been working out and doing some things around here for about a month, knowing that there's going to be some adaptation changes. That might be contrary to what maybe a lot of people do, and that they're looking for a baseline score to a certain degree. I mean, in my area specifically for the range of motion stuff, there's probably a value to seeing what those freshmen look like as they walk in the door. And in some cases, I'll hit them with that assessment. But I think I kind of like for them to come in and get their feet wet and start to become a Division I athlete, because the jump is so much greater than they ever imagined. And I don't care what any high school kid says or what he plays baseball year round, so coming in and doing fall ball and playing 56-game regular season schedule is going to be easy. No, it's not. The expectation is so much higher. The effort level is so much higher. The intensity is higher. The demands on their body is higher. The academic piece, the time. It's a completely different world. So coming in and just letting them get their feet wet a little bit is kind of my approach, and then kind of going from there. So.
Yeah, and I'd even say on that note, the same as when they leave. When these guys that you have go to the next level, it's again a whole nother volume, a whole new environment, and half the amenities and half the weight rooms that you guys have.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
Yeah. So much the same. I will jump them when they first get on campus. You can call it a baseline, but that test means nothing to me. That's more of an education on their standpoint, just to try to teach them, hey, this is what this number means, and all that way they kind of get it in their head. This is what we're going to be doing. We'll train for a month. I'll test them again, see if there's any change, because I just want to get more data points on them, because data doesn't mean anything unless you have enough of it. So I'm just trying to collect data, but I'm not using that data yet. Once they get on campus, I've got a generalized program, doesn't matter pitcher position. We're trying to kind of get you on the level of our main movements, pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging. We want to make sure we master those movements. So we don't need to specialize anything with individualization. We just get you mastering the foundations. And then as I get more and more data, that's when we start moving more and more towards the individualized program. Some of the freshmen will have a little bit of individualization by the time they get to the end of the fall if their data isn't all over the place. But oftentimes with freshmen, because they are going through so many changes, not only from a physiological perspective, but from a stress and therefore fatigue standpoint, sometimes their data is all over the place. If their data is all over the place, I'm not going to try to feed them down a particular road. I'm just going to kind of keep them on a basic until we can get some sort of, homeostasis out of them, or I get a better idea based on what my eyes are seeing or the assessment that we have for the range of motion. So really that's when we start putting them on their individual program, which usually happens by the time we start second semester.
No, I love that you said that, and the physiological changes that occur. I think we've been kind of ingrained to believe that, you know, 1 or 2 tests a year are fairly accurate of the physiology of these people we're working with. And you might test someone when they come in and literally a month later move quite differently due to a number of reasons. But I think it's great how you do that, and then you continue to collect to get a feel of where they're at. And with the guys that are coming in, especially the untrained ones, the chance of that changing quite a bit from when you test them the second time is probably fairly high. There's always going to be change. We've been talking a lot about this with COVID lately, and just how much guys are going to come back so much different based on, you know, what they're doing, what kind of stimulus they're getting, et cetera. So that's a really good point. Okay, Jesse, back to you. So they come in, they do the balance in the plank. Okay, we're looking at overall balance and proprioceptive ability of this individual. Okay, what are we doing with that? Are you taking it from there and putting it into a plan? And we could even fast forward a little bit to more in season or even fall ball. You get these assessments on them. What are we doing with that information?
So they get graded as a deficit. If they score under that score of 48 on their balance scans for either upper or lower extremity, it's considered a deficit. So they have prescriptive corrective exercise that they go and do, and it might be a lot of eyes closed stuff, eyes closed on phone, doing some sort of functional movement with on phone, just changing the dynamics, how maybe eyes open, catching ball, you know, just simple stuff that we've probably seen a million times in a training room or a PT clinic. With some adaptation, I like to throw some creative flavor in there just from a standpoint of keeping the guys interested. If it's tough and it looks flashy and sexy, they're going to be more apt to doing it than just, all right, stand there with your hands on your hip, close your eyes, and stand on the phone barefooted, count to 30. I'm never going to get a guy in here to do that consistently. So trying to bring in that competitive component for a kid that's 18 to 22 years old is important. So the balance scans have their specific exercise that they're prescribed to do if they're testing into that as a deficit. You know, the hip rotation, pelvic tilt, and too much anterior pelvic tilt has its own deficit corrective exercises. Shoulder, internal, external rotation, flexion. Those are the ones I look at for shoulder. Ankle has some, and then T-spine has some. So each area of that, each one of those deficits has targeted corrective exercises that attack that. And every year I tend to tweak those exercises somewhat, but for the most part, we try to keep that as standard as possible. And if they're doing that on a regular basis, we're seeing the results. I ask the guys, just give me 10 minutes, 3 times a week. If you can do that, hit your corrective exercise program, 10 minutes, 3 times a week, I'm pretty happy with that. If I can get it, some guys like to do it every day. If you look at some of our pictures in here, and Skip will walk by the door and be like, what the hell is everybody doing in here laying on the floor in the training room? There's a purpose to it. And that mindset has certainly shifted where the expectation is come in here and get your stuff done. And pitchers tend to be a lot better at it than position players. I think it's just the way it goes. They have a lot of time before they get throwing. Their days tend to be a little bit longer. But in season also, it's important to note, when we're in the spring, it gets a lot easier for these guys to get some of this stuff done because, you know, we're showing up for a 6:30 start on a Saturday night. You know, guys are getting here 12:30 or so, and there's a lot of downtime where they can come in and get some of this stuff done. In the fall, it's a little bit different where they have different class requirements. They have different weight room requirements. They have the baseball is different. The contact time is different, and it's a lot more encouraged to get some of that stuff done on their own. So that's kind of what I'm doing with all those deficits that we grade as a whole.
No, that's very detailed. I appreciate that. Now, so out of curiosity,
Let me. Sorry to interrupt. I think it's important to note the other part of how we implement that, because I think that's, you know, what everybody wants to know, and it's unique, is that the way we implement it is the guys are responsible for it themselves. It is a 100% voluntary thing. We don't put it in during, you know, a mandatory period of time because, you know, at the university level, we have a lot of restrictions on time. So for us, we have to get the buy-in of getting them to understand why they're doing what they're doing, because we, like Jesse said, he asked them to do it 10 minutes a day. We put that on them. we oftentimes provide opportunities. So after my lifts, when we're done with mobility, I oftentimes have that as an opportunity. Pitchers kind of have the routine. This year we implemented it with our hitters, that before they hit, you know, we got a nice new hitting facility here. They go through a tunnel and they can get, you know, 2 or 3 minutes of some activation drills, but then they get 1 or 2 of their corrective exercises. So if they kind of just incorporate that in the routine every single day, that's how they're attacking these goals. So we don't have to take dedicated time, because that's the hardest part at our levels. Where do you find time to get these things done? Because we ask a lot of players. You know, we ask a lot of them on top of their schoolwork, and here we're competing at such a high level. So we ask them to do it on their own, but we also provide certain areas where we say, hey, this is a really good opportunity for you to get those in. So I thought it was important to show how we implement that, because I think it's unique, but it's also pretty successful.
Well, and along those lines too, Jason does add some of those exercises that if I'm feeling like some of the guys aren't having the compliance level that I want for them to be putting into their corrective exercise program, he'll come and take 4 or 5 of my exercises and spread them out through the week and put them in his dynamic warm-up. Again, that's where that strength coach, athletic trainer marriage kind of comes into effect, where he's like, don't, you know, I got this. Let me add some of these. Pick 3 that you think are most important that cover most of the people, and he'll put them in his dynamic warm-up. So just trying to find a way to get guys to do it is the tough way is tough to get it done. Some guys are much better at it than others. But
that's fantastic detail. And honestly, probably a huge part of your guys' success is you let the athletes own this information. They got to take care of themselves. And when these guys go to the next level and they're in the minor leagues or they make their way up, no one's going to hold their hand. It just doesn't happen at the next level. And the guys that are successful are the guys that know their drills, they know their habits, they know themselves, and they got to take care of it. So that's awesome that you guys are instilling that at this age. You know, and out of curiosity, going back to you, Jesse, when you have these guys, let's say someone tests at a deficit in the balance and plank, and we add these correctives in or these things they have to do. When they reassess, and let's say there are no more deficiencies and they're in a really good spot, are we continuing to maintain these habits, or are we saying, hey, you've done a really good job and you're functioning really well, and we feel that we can minimize your time in here with me? 1, I'm tired of looking at you, and 2, you're moving well. So how do you handle that?
I encourage them to always continue to take that approach to take care of themselves, right? It's just because we're testing good doesn't mean some of that effort should ever stop. So it's more like, hey, congratulations, you put forth this effort, look what you accomplished. Now, continue this. You don't have to continue these exercises maybe as often, and I'm not going to come hunt you down to say, hey, you haven't been doing your correctives lately. But just understand, look at the impact you made in your scores or your range of motion, whatever it might have been. I'm going to take it off your sheet. Just on the other side of my wall here, I have a TV because electronics speaks to this generation, right? So they basically go in there, and on there, my TV's set up. It's a 50-inch with different files on there where I keep all the corrective exercise assessment. Basically what the player does, he goes, he clicks on his file, clicks on his name, and it has pictures of all his exercises laid out for him. So once he tests out of that, I go in there and delete those pictures and delete those exercises off, where he's still just, when he opens up, there's your assignment. That's all you're required to do. But certainly a lot of that's encouraged. And some of the older guys that have seen some of that, or have been hurt and learned how to do some of this stuff, a lot of those guys are the ones that continue and make that effort on a daily basis. But testing out of it certainly means I'm not going to put it on your corrective exercise program, but it's always encouraged. Yeah. If you devote a half hour a day to your physical well-being, even just stretch at night before you fall asleep and stretch in the morning when you wake up, I think there's something to be said about that. And that's kind of the philosophy there.
No, absolutely. That's really good information. You know, Jason, I want to go back to you here. I remember, you know, you talking about your hesitations coming into Sparta. I think there's a misconception that, you know, there's a lot of research that has been done as far as, you know, what exercises will help target specific variables. And I think that's important, but it's also important to understand that how is it going to fit into what you know and what you do currently, because you're obviously in this role for a reason. You're really good at what you do. You've built your philosophy over time. So I know early on there was this misconception of having to kind of implement these specific exercises into what you do. But you've told me before, this is an Arizona State lifting program, with a Sparta emphasis. Can you dive into that just a little bit more on how, like, you take everything you've known and you've learned over time, but you've been able to adapt and add things in specifically that you think are needed?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it goes back to our goal is health and culture. And the program that I've been doing, with the current coaching staff, because that's a part of it too. The staff you have and you work with, we know how practices and volumes and everything goes. I've been with the staff and we produced a really good product out on the field that was healthy, strong, successful. So anytime you talk about adding something different you think is going to dramatically, change that, you get a little bit worried because it's natural human instinct to stick to what works. But I think I've learned from a lot of other people, another thing that's going on, if you're not constantly looking to change and evolve and really tweak your program to get better, you're going to get left behind by those that are looking at things. So when I have this technology that's going to give me some information, really I just needed to really take a look at what this technology is telling me, and figure out how that can fit with how I train in the weight room and to do things similar to the way I've always done. And, I'll admit there are certain things that I can get from the data that Sparta gives us that I don't use because it doesn't quite fit with what we're trying to implement. It can do a lot more on the fatigue side of things, taking this exercise in, out, but that doesn't necessarily work with how our structure is put into place. So what I had to do is figure out how can I get some of this technology to implement into my program but still marry the two. And that's when I came up with, okay, let's just start with the biggest, most bang for your buck exercise, and then how can that fit? The longer I've done, now I can say, all right, this is your A block exercise. We're gonna squat, but now this is what the Sparta tells me on what's the most advantageous plyometric. So now I can get even more specific without really being different because I was already programming a plyometric with some sort of squat or deadlift. But now I can kind of individualize it. It takes a little bit of work in terms of how I write my program. But like anything, once you get used to it, the time kind of goes away. And you also have to understand, it doesn't matter how much time it takes for me. My job is to produce the best product. And it's about these players. And if it means I have to write programs and spend hours and days making sure that they get the best program, that's what I'm going to have to do, because that's what you have to do to compete at a high level. So once I kind of got that figured out in year one and year two, now I try to sprinkle in, okay, how can I further evolve this? So this year I'm looking at, kind of changing. So maybe in our last block where we might do some, basic mobility drills that everybody does, well, maybe now that can be another Sparta block where we can individually tailor something again. So like everything, it's always going to evolve. But you just really have to branch out and get over the insecurities of, I do it this way, it works, I'm not changing. Because anybody will tell you, Jesse, see my workouts, I'm pretty old school. I was raised that way. I like discipline. I like hard work and toughness. But if you're not utilizing data, you're not getting the most out of your kids.
No, that's really well said. And I think as we've touched on before, even sometimes it's not always about what you add in, but what you can take away based on their specific qualities and when they're really good as well. So I wanted to move on a little bit here. I know we got just about 10 minutes left, but really I want to talk about some of the job that you guys have done. I mean, I wanted you guys on here because we've seen a lot of success from your department and specifically with your guys over the last few years, but really just looking at, some of these leading indicators, as we talked about earlier, if we're looking at some of your metrics, ASU's metrics continue to show physical development and progress towards more resilience. We're not going to share slides, but these are all up and to the right. It's pretty impressive, whether that's, team average Sparta score, really, and what that's talking about is the total output of the metrics and really how close they are. So just efficient force producers. But I think even more so than that, the outcomes, that's what we all care about. Jesse, I know we said we were going to kind of touch on this again from the beginning, but let's talk a bit about these results you guys have observed from 2017 to 2019, with these lagging metrics. Let's even just look at number of injuries, right? We can start at 2017 there. You guys had 22 and, down to 10 in 2019. Let's touch a little bit on these.
So I'll go back. My first year at ASU was the 2015-2016 fiscal year. Coming in and getting my feet wet at this level, consistently owning my position here as much as I could, it was still a very probably traditional athletic training approach, right? I kind of sat around, I taped guys, I waited for injuries. If a guy was hurting, I did something for it. If a guy was injured, I'd rehab it. I'd get guys to the doctors and that sort of thing. Well, after so many injuries, the 2015-2016 year, 2016-2017 year, I think it just got to a point like I'm tired of rehabbing all the time, right? So at some point we got to fix this because coaches aren't happy. I'm not happy. Players certainly aren't happy being broken. So it was kind of this mission that Jason and I just took on. How can we fix this? So we gotta change our philosophy. And now I think I try to put into perspective that if I can spend 90% of my time in my day, whatever that day looks like, in preventing, and the other 10% is based upon things that happen, injuries are going to happen. We're never going to stop every injury. We're certainly never going to stop the traumatic injuries, which we don't count into those totals because, getting hit by a baseball, crashing into somebody, breaking a wrist on a, those things happen. That's part of the game. But if I can prevent the hamstrings, the low back injuries, if I can prevent the shoulder injuries and the elbow injuries, those are the main targets of this. So going forward, since 2017, we went from a 70% injury rate by my calculations, which was basically 7 out of every 10 guys on our roster, and we hold a roster anywhere between 30 and 35. 7 out of 10 guys were hurt and missed time, missed practice, missed scrimmage, missed games. And in a 56-game season, if you miss 10 games, that's a significant amount. That's like what, missing 30 games as being on the DL in Pro Bowl for 30 to 40 days. That's just not acceptable here. So we since then we've decreased our injury rate from about 70% down to about 30% in the last 2 years, and it's stayed pretty consistent. And I think had we played this year, given the upperclassmen and the program that they were on, that got drafted this year, I think we were going to be right around there again. So.
Yeah, and let me brag for you for a second for your department. We're looking at injuries down, a lot, like you just said, 50% decrease in surgeries, MRIs are down, rate of occurrence down. These are impressive numbers, and a lot of them, again, these lagging ones are easy to see at the end of the year, but really these leading indicators that we keep track of all year and then we look at and how we test, I think using that data to change what we do is an important piece. And Jason, you talked about there's times that you'll see guys trending in a negative way or in an extreme way in season, and you're making tweaks on that. So can you just give us a quick example of something like that that's happened and where you've made tweaks?
Yeah, luckily in recent times, we really haven't had to worry about it too much. If I do see something trending that way when we're going in season, the easiest thing to do is drop everything that really doesn't address that particular variable. Like what you said, sometimes it's not always adding, it's taking away. But a real specific example early on that really, really brought me home with understanding the system that we have is we had a pitcher who, before when we first got the system presented and was, naturally a little bit of a higher drive. So, tall, lanky, wiry pitcher, not super strong, real fluid in their movement. Trained in the off season, in terms of making sure we hammered home his squat and deadlift and really changed his movement signature and got it in a really good, healthy place. Fast forward to in season, there's a couple years ago, we had a different pitching coach at the time, wanted to do things differently in the weight room. And so we didn't get to do things the way I would normally like to do it. And his drive just shot through the roof. I'm talking extreme. And as it was incrementally going up, I kept on saying, hey, we got a problem here. I'd like to address it. But, we work with coaches. I'm support staff. I got to do at the end of the day kind of what I'm told. Well, we get towards the end of the season and the kid didn't blow out, but basically we had to shut him down with some significant elbow pain. And because he was basically at the cusp of that. So at that point in time, I got permission to kind of go back to normal. So all we did was just hammer our load. So we just hammered front squats. Didn't do anything else but some front squats and deadlifts. And sure enough, in a span of 2 weeks, we were able to get his drive down lower. It was still extreme, but we got it trending in the right direction. At that point in time, the season ended and he was a senior, so I didn't get to kind of continue that experiment. But that right there kind of made me see that we were doing something correct, that the data is actually correlating to what I'm seeing on the jump scan and how it's relating to injuries on the field, which I thought was extremely important, to understand that what we're doing and implementing actually works. Because so many times we think it works. We take a philosophy or principle and we put it into a plan of action hoping that it works, but we don't really know because nothing presented itself. Well, we had an unfortunate scenario that it presented itself, but it proved that what we were doing was working.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's like, you've had a lot of success too. And so it's like, it's so easy to fall back. This is what I've done and it's always worked. But there are always these outliers. There are always the ones that aren't going to make the adaptation that the others do. And in that case, it's a conversation, in this case, with your coach and addressing this with the student athlete at the end of the day. That's phenomenal. And that's really, I think, so much of the value. And I think early on is wanting to validate what you're doing, and especially programming off season, validating your periodization, but really this in-season value of seeing things that are different and seeing things trending in a negative way and how you can adapt and improve the availability of that individual. That is something that is amazing. And you guys have done such a great job with this. And Jesse, I know you probably had something there. I'm cutting you off.
That's fine.
Did you get my last meal invite last time I was in town? But we won't talk about that. That's for another time. Anyways, you guys, this has been incredible. I would love to do a part 2 at some point because we could keep going all day. We really value this partnership with Arizona State, and you guys have been phenomenal. So we appreciate you guys spending the time today and being on here. And so at that point, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you for Jason and Jesse for taking the time out of your day